Next up is Yuki Uenaka, who's a publisher as well as the head of brand partnerships at Highsnobiety Japan. With a background in advertising from ad agencies and fashion PR, Yuki eventually started working at Highsnobiety Japan 5 years ago, focusing on marketing and ad sales, while also covering editorial editing and direction. His focus is on merging creativity and commerce, both on the printed page and the digital flicker. Welcome, Yuki. It's great to have you with us from Tokyo.
Thank you for having me.
And as mentioned, you have a background in advertising and marketing originally. What made you get interested in fashion and media in the first place?
Fashion is always my interest from really early days. And I grew up in a very countryside in Japan, and the informations are limited, and the education is sort of old-fashioned way, and it's all about like being the same in a group. So fashion is always like teaching me how to be different and how to be unique. So fashion is always my interest, and I studied like art, fashion, music, musical theater, and then I get into advertising job. And I've been working for about like 3 to 4 years. And then advertising is more of more research and market, and it's fun to do like seeing the markets, but I also wanted to do more creative production. So now I'm in a fashion publishing and doing what I want to do.
And you started working at Highsnobiety about 5 years ago. What was it like making the leap from advertising to fashion publishing, an entirely different field? And what are the differences and what are the similarities?
I think advertising industry and fashion publishing is very close connected, but what I do in each industry is very different. And marketing and advertising is more based on stats and numbers.
What's your experience like working with Highsnobiety?
I think it's very challenging, and since it's an international title, I work a lot with international people. And Highsnobiety has a UK branch in New York and of course in Berlin. So I get to do lots of global projects. So that is very challenging, and it's very difficult to localize in the Japanese market, because Japanese market is quite a different market.
What does your position as head of brand partnerships at Highsnobiety entail, and do you have a team?
Though my title for Highsnobiety Japan is brand partnership, and the title saying is more based on advertising works, but I also do editorials as well. And I think that is very important to have like different perspective, like advertising and editorial minds. Yeah, to have a really creative, to make creatives, it's good to have lots of different perspectives. So
I agree. I feel like anybody can be, and to some extent is, a publisher in today's complex media landscape, creating personas and universes online through Instagram, social media, exercising content and creativity within very public frameworks. In many ways, it's both branding and editorial work, like you mentioned. What parts of the fashion system depend on us publishing today, if any at all?
Well, I think what's most exciting part of the fashion media is to see the variety of different interpretations by connecting like all professionals. And it's like cooking, and it's more interesting to see more of the way you cook rather than just the ingredients, and that really gives you a more deeper understanding. So and sometimes effective from someone else's mouth. So yeah, and those creative exercises will lead to grow the business, like for both parties, and more importantly, to cultivate the society for a better world, I believe.
There's one particular mutual dependency between the fashion industry and fashion publishing that I'd like to highlight, hence your background, advertising, ads or advertorials. How do you sustain the Highsnobiety magazine artistically and financially?
Advertising is one of the most important things to sustain the magazine. And there are sometimes issues. Ad limits the creative freedom. But I think if there's a faith or trust for both of them, there shouldn't be a problem. And that's from advertising perspective. But I think in the first place, like what digital changed the magazine is digital really changed the value of magazine. So I think fashion media like has to start thinking of like monetizing in different ways rather than advertising. For example, like collaborating products and selling products. Also like producing trips, rather than B2B business to more B2C to C business. In that way, you can sustain the magazine and do the digital as well, and yeah.
And as you mentioned, fashion publications today depend heavily on commercial partnerships to survive. And with the decline of traditional advertising formats and ad revenue, fashion media seems to replace the traditional ad agencies in many ways, producing promotional content. How do you approach this at Highsnobiety, and what platforms or mediums do you offer advertising on?
It really depends on what the story is about and like how you make the story. Digital and print has a different characteristic. So, but print has more deeper understanding and more deeper content. So I will always propose with the print media and then follow up with the digital.
And I'm, as always, advocating for the printed medium and paper publishing, but in talking about contemporary publishing, I think it's inevitable to mention this predicted print death. Do you think there's an enduring appeal or desire for materiality, for physical objects of the time capsule right now? And what do you think is worth printing in 2021?
This year, like I get to interview with a professor from Kyoto University, and he's advocating benefit of inconvenience, and which is about uh, something inconvenient, meaning like it takes time and effort to make something, to make something physical, and that really connects to human emotions, and which leads to more deeper understandings.
I think so as well, and I think there's something about, you know, in the middle of this very saturated digital landscape, being able to put your attention into something physical and into something that feels a bit more perhaps permanent, rather than the instant, you know, mechanisms of social media. I think the ways in which fashion is presented has changed, you know, dramatically, from the glossy print pages to digital articles, video, Instagram, TikTok. On the other hand, how do you maximize the digital experience as opposed to the more tactile and tangible? And what do you think an online platform can do that print cannot?
What online platform did to the world is the globalization of the informations, and which is really good, and that made it in that speed. So as we are human beings and we have our emotions, so I think we need something physical to maximize the digital experience.
What's your favorite medium to work with?
I would say print, because it's a lot of work, but you know, when it's printed in a way, and it's just like I did it.
Absolutely. Fashion people's entire lifestyles and economies are dependent on commercial partnerships, you know, receiving product placements, being flown into dinners, fashion shows. How do you navigate this yourself and through your publishing platform?
I try not to receive the products, and I'll just keep these events minimum, because I think there's always an inspiration outside the fashion world. So I try to take more time outside fashion, maybe half the time, and then connect these to with fashion.
So lastly and more broadly, what changes would you like to see in the fashion industry at large?
I've been thinking like for weeks for this question, but maybe I would like to, it's maybe not a change, but I would like to see more like fashion moves the politics, or fashion moves the education, especially in this difficult time. Like people are trying to avoid studying fashion or art, and that's because we haven't really shown them how essential the fashion or art is.
So thank you so much, Yuki, for being here and for taking the time to do this conversation. It was amazing.
Yeah.